Hey everybody, this is the first of hopefully several videos on different subjects as regards to content marketing and SEO. We've been doing some internal trainings and I realized it'd be valuable to also bring this external and share what we've learned internally through the years of doing this ourselves so you don't make the same mistakes. So the first subject I'm going to talk about is linkable markets for content, and what I mean by that is how to determine a piece of content that you create will have a high link upside. It's not as easy as just creating something that's great and doing outreach with it and having success. There's a lot more to it because some markets link out, some don't. And through experience and time, you'll find where those are, what it is, and what to do about it. So the most important question to ask yourself when doing outreach first is, does this content idea have enough strong prospects? And it's not just people who have blogs, but who have a website that links in a way frequently that is receptive to your specific kind of content and website. So one way to look at that is, are there enough websites in a certain niche? So if you're looking at content specific to spiders and you're pitching a set of spider blogs, there's probably a very finite number of those available to you to do outreach to. That means there might only be 20 or so, probably on the high side, targets that are really strong in the spider space that you can reach out with content regarding that. But if you go a little more general and you think wildlife, there's probably a much wider breadth. Of course, there's an offset between the two, is how targeted that content is specific to the need. So if you are writing about spiders, it's probably a good likelihood that spider blogs will at least take that content and take it to mind because it's so specific to them. But on the wildlife side, if it's a little more general, there might be less strong tie-in. But if there's sometimes an intersection between the two, or you can think of something like Game of Thrones blogs, there's probably a good number of those covering that sector and still a passionate community about it. So that's a good opportunity to do outreach and have success with your content. But the next piece after that is just how often are those sites posting. If you think about spider blogs, not only are they not posting, not only are there not many blogs, but they're also not posting that frequently because there's not much content to talk about in regards to spiders, most likely. Compare that to a news site who's probably writing 20 to 30 articles a day, sometimes maybe more than that, depending on the venue. And that means that even if there's less of those net, the total publishing is what matters. So if you really think about it in terms of not number of sites, but rather number of net posts being published per day in a certain sector, it's probably a better way of thinking about the total opportunity. Of course, you only have one email to send to a news site, so you better get it right. But you can also find different beat reporters. And of course, if they're publishing more often, they're probably more likely to take that seriously. But something to think about regards to that is also how often are they getting pitched. A site like the New York Times, of course, is getting hammered with pitches every day, and it doesn't matter that they're publishing that much because as a ratio, they're probably getting more pitches per post published by a huge degree than any spider blog is getting. But comparatively, there is some kind of perfect ground where a site like NBC San Diego is still a high authority, high traffic sending site, but is not going to get nearly as many pitches comparatively to the New York Times. So there is a nice fit between those three in order to find the biggest opportunity for a piece of content. And as I see it, the biggest success comes in that intersection. One example of that is this Mike blog. It's well known, it publishes a lot, but your average Joe on the street is not going to recognize it, and that's probably a good standard to think of when thinking about how many pitches does a site get. Other site like that would be Vulture, big pop culture site, publishing a lot, authoritative, can send a lot of traffic, but not New York Times or CNN level of saturation. Finally, Orange County Register, local news site covering everything Orange County, but is not going to be so overdone that so many people will be pitching them, and as long as there's something specific to the Orange County area, there's probably a good chance that they're going to cover that. So a good shortcut I like using and determine how big a linkable market is doing a search like X blogs or X news and seeing what the average authority is of say the top 4 sites on that search result that are clearly about that thing. So for example, if I did spider blogs as a search, I see one site has only 30 linking root domains to it as a whole. That's a good indicator in general that this market is not very big because normally communities tend to link to each other, or if there's intent, generally they're going to be people linking into a site like this. So this shows that true market size is not that great for a spider type space. But in other ones, you might do search like recipe blogs, you'll find people into the 70s, and you can obviously break that down appropriately and see where the true opportunity is in terms of link opportunity. When we do a lot of top and middle funnel content, so you want to take it on a more micro level, you can do these searches and see how many links are coming into pages, on page one. I like looking for normally 3 to 4 sites for high confidence that have 20 plus linking root domains, and that shows that there's generally a high link opportunity for that piece. Of course, that also means it's more competitive, but as a starting point of building domain authority and just nudging that content up the search result, there is going to be, is still probably worthwhile if we feel like we can make something that's better than these 2 assets. Additionally, it's also a good thing to think about that these kind of markets with many linking root domains on page one, they also tend to generate links passively without a lot of cold outreach, which is obviously a scalable effort when you can achieve that without a lot of time and work. So these kinds of spaces are one of my favorite for starting out and building a site and a business. Next, on the other side of that, though, is there are high search terms that unfortunately don't get a lot of links into them. Something about them just doesn't make them inherently linkable. You can use the same process to reverse that. Quotes, for example, is a space. It generally has thousands upon thousands of searches per market, but in general does not attract a ton of links. So if you're trying to build something for links as a primary KPI, you'd be best off not matching that to quotes if you want to really have a lot of success. So I would suggest doing this kind of analysis and seeing, are there a lot of 20 plus linking root domain sites on the front page? And if there aren't, you're probably going to have to win on domain authority alone in order to get those rankings. But if you're trying to get links primarily, it's a good, or at least as a primary KPI in addition to the rankings, you might want to move on until you have the domain authority, or make something that's so good that you're confident you can at least get 5 to 10, which would probably be your upside on a space like this. A whole different category of content to create is broken link building focused. Garrett French, Citation Labs, really smart guy in regards to broken link building. He's kind of wrote the Bible on this, and this post specifically has a lot of good detail on what to create, what people look for in this kind of content. Generally, it's more academic, helpful, in-depth guides that people look for on link pages. So it's a whole different niche and type of content, but it has its own upside because a lot of traffic can be sent from these, and also they tend to be higher authority in general. They're just very different. They're not going to receive infographics, news, entertainment focused content very well. You can make something that's educational and entertaining at the same time, but you better have that education subtext in order to really get a lot of links on these traditional link pages. There's also very specific niches that tend to have the most of these, and Garrett has done a great job of kind of determining those and doing that legwork for us as a starting point. And this is a great list that you can match educational in-depth guides to, and then know that there's existing link pages that make the market size pretty large and the opportunity thereby pretty large as well. Furthermore, when you're going back to blogs, sometimes there's high domain authority and there's not necessarily high link intent, at least as it comes to cold pitching. So what I like there is the thought of inclusivity versus exclusivity when doing outreach. Is inclusive markets frequently have link out to content that they have pitched to them. You'll find that their content tends to talk about a post or a piece of content exclusively. They don't take too much time to create. their news sites, their sites like Laughing Squid, the mic sites. Those are the kind of sites that are more inclusive because they're looking for those outside sources in order to fill their content calendar. But something like exclusive markets are, I think, the opposite of that, is they tend to only focus on their tight-knit community, and they can generate a lot of links and domain authority through focusing on that community. But something about their context means that they're going to be less receptive to outside people pitching them. So in these markets, it's just not recommended that you go into them with a cold pitch strategy. You can build relationships and over time in order to acquire links, or find secondary ways to penetrate if your focus is on finance or on baking. So how you identify that, in my experience, is you pull up the list of links to a site, say in the baking space, and you find themes in the kind of links that come into them. One thing you'll notice there and in recipes and a lot of exclusive markets is that they're in general, the content and people that link to them, it takes a long time to create that content. Because if you're cold pitching someone a recipe, you're asking for a lot to get 3+ hours from someone to recreate that recipe, maybe do an iteration of it, and then create a post on it. That's just not something that's ever going to happen. It only happens with people you have a strong affinity for and there's a lot of demand for. So you'll see in these kinds of situations, people are following recipe bloggers over time. They find good recipes maybe through search, and they adapt them and then link to them. And it's not just this market, but it's just one sign of an exclusive market is the type of links that come in just take a ton of time that on the cold pitch side is not realistic. On the cold pitch side, you want to find spots where people can create a link in very low friction environments in order to have the most success. Secondarily, personal finance market is a good example of this. You'll see a lot of their links are secondary resources rather than primary. What I mean by that is they're kind of thought of because the people are following that market, and they're linked as kind of a citation as part of a bigger story rather than being the primary story that's included there, because that's a big difference. Because if you're cold pitching someone, almost always they're writing a post from scratch solely about that post. But if you're in a market and you're exposed there and you have good visibility, people are going to remember you. They're going to recollect that article that was created because you're a thought leader or maybe a brand in that space, and you'll be more frequently received as a secondary resource and build equity that way. It's not going to be the only way that they build equity. There will be primary linking in each of these spaces, but if you see it as a high percentage ratio in that market, you'll probably find that the true link opportunity size for you as a cold pitcher isn't quite as great as that 70 domain authority might seem. So how you break this if you are in sorry, I jumped one step ahead, but one thing generally based on all of that is you'll have strong to weak markets that come out of all of these factors. City-specific news outlets are the perfect intersection of depth, width, and frequency of not getting pitched very often. So that's why you see a lot of 10 best cities for entrepreneurs kind of studies. Unfortunately, those are now oversaturated because SEOs become aware of that. There are very niche ways of hitting those if you get creative. Like, for example, I saw NerdWallet did a post on how much it costs for New Englanders to get to the Super Bowl. And they looked at ticket prices. They looked at the cost of hotels and flights, and also the game itself, and just created an interesting article and price based on that. And of course, New England and Boston's focus outlets covered that because it was interesting. It was a unique way of angling towards those news outlets that's still related to finance. So you can still find those opportunities, or if you're really topically focused, have success, but I don't suggest going too heavily into it, or you run the risk of less success. Lifestyle, kind of pop culture as I define it, is a good sector in general because people are looking for fun, interesting content to share and be entertained. So if you can find a way to connect to that, you can find consistent success with this kind of work. In addition, broken link building, as we mentioned with Garrett's process, there's a lot of those markets out there. They just need their own specific content, and it needs to be done well. And on the opposite side, in our experience, recipe and food bloggers, personal finance bloggers, they are just not going to spend the time to create or post your content. They don't post outside content that isn't a recipe. Personal finance bloggers want money, or they need to feel like you're part of that community that's also on that same wavelength, and they feel like you're a brand. They're not going to cover you. So if you're in one of those markets, you are in recipe or food, and you want to get to that next level, what do you have to do? You have to find tangential connections. So if it's food, and you can go to pop culture. In this example, there's just fun posters that still tie back to the brand, have a little parody fun at it, and that can have success in those same kind of markets by inserting humor while still staying true to the brand identity when creating that content. And that's what some of the biggest, toughest markets do. Like we talked about NerdWallet already, going to city news, creating the connection of money or personal finance, and then tying it to other markets like pop culture. It could be sports in their instance when they created that New England study, or career, or HR, or business. These are still about money in some way, but it allows them to pitch new markets and not hit that personal finance blogger market that's just not going to take to their content as they want. Of course, it's not just who you reach out to, it's what you reach out to them with. News sites are going to want data studies. They want news, but if you're on the in-house or agency side, unlikely that you actually, unless you're on the product side, going to have a story that's not content focused that's product focused very often. So you got to create something new, which generally becomes a data study, debut that new content and pitch that to them. That's the kind of thing news sites want to cover. They're not going to cover big infographics. It just doesn't fit their beat. Pop culture either. It's just not news. It's not interesting. It doesn't fit their semantic focus of what their readers want. But it does fit bloggers who, on the reverse side, maybe don't want to cover data studies as often. It's not as natural of a fit. They're not covering news. They sometimes will do that. You could throw them an infographic version of a data study. That's kind of fun. That could be their own way of doing it. And they're one of those people that tends to not have much depth in terms of post frequency. So it doesn't make as much sense for data studies without a big infographic, because it's going to take them time to whip that up, and it's going to be higher friction, and therefore you're going to have less success. And link pages on the final side, as we talked about, tend to be more educational, utility-focused guides that are in depth, that are useful, that tie specifically to those markets we talked about. And finally, there's a lot of nudges for all these rules, but it's not 100%. You can break some of these constructs if you build something that's stupidly better than anything else out there. And I've seen that happen and work, and that's how you do get #1 rankings, is by breaking the standard. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't always work, and what you think is reality, or you think you can build a quotes post that can get you 10 plus links, it doesn't happen. And unfortunately, that's going to be part of the game, but you got to take some risks occasionally in order to get those rankings that would otherwise have been unachievable without a 70 domain authority in order to get up there. But it's at least a start. I think in general, you want to use these frameworks as shortcuts for consistency and repetition, especially in high authority markets. You can't keep taking miscellaneous risks unless it seems like a very high authority or high ROI opportunity for you. So I hope this was useful. If you have any questions about this process in general, I'd be happy to answer them. This should hopefully be the first of many of these. So if you have any topic suggestions, I would love to hear those. And also, please subscribe if you like this video. More coming down the pipe. And I hope you found this valuable, and we'll come back to check out more videos in the future. Thanks.